Now we move back in time and then forward. In the 6th century, the Romans overthrew their Etruscan kings and became a republic. Rome then proceeded to conquer the surrounding Italian cities and then, over the next 150 years, gained control of the hugely wealthy Greek colonies on what is now the island of Sicily. Next, they fought a long and bloody battle with Carthage for control of the Mediterranean. The map shows the area that the Romans controlled by 215 BCE in red. From an art history standpoint, the conquest of the Greek colonies in Sicily was hugely important because the Roman army hauled back wagon loads of Greek sculpture, and its citizens were hooked. From here on, Romans would be dedicated collectors and imitators of Greek art. Imperium is a vital concept in Roman history. It's the word that becomes the root of emperor and imperial, but what it really means is the power and authority that a government ruler wields. Roman art is all about power and authority. Power in Rome was in fact complicated and often up for grabs. The two executive rulers, the consuls, were selected by and ruled, at least in theory, by consent of the Senate, a group of powerful older men from noble families. In times of crisis, and more like Rome faced a lot of crises, the consuls could appoint a dictator and hand all power over to him for 6 months. Roman patricians, or nobles, competed for political and military leadership, which conferred dignitas. While this is the root of our word dignity, it meant much more. It meant status, honor, popularity, importance in society. This was what Roman leaders desired, sometimes, and what they sought, sometimes at the expense of republican principles. It's a good term for you to remember because much Roman art attempts to capture this quality of dignitas. The same pattern, by the way, was repeated inside the Roman family. The father, or paterfamilias, literally had the power of life and death over his children, and something pretty close to this power over his wife. The patricians, or nobles, in turn ruled over the plebeian free citizens, and everyone ruled over the society's many slaves. Roman Republican portraiture was all about dignitas. Roman patrician society was obsessed with lineage. Noble families kept wax images of their ancestors, called imagines, in cupboards in their homes. The statue on the right shows a patrician with busts of his ancestors. Oops. There we go. The status that came with age and lineage is reflected in veristic, or so-called truthful art. It may not actually have been really truthful. There's some evidence that the subject asked sculptors to exaggerate their wrinkles to convey more age and experience than they actually had. Nevertheless, you see a clear contrast with Greek sculptural ideals, which reflects a different set of values in turn. Less worship of youth and beauty, more admiration for wisdom and experience. But veristic portraiture can get a little weird. This general's portrait combines the age and wisdom in his facial features with a body that presumably is intended to convey vigor and physical strength. I find it a little weird. Let's continue our breakneck race through Roman history with a video clip about how Rome's first emperor, Caesar Augustus, used art to rebrand himself. Let me emphasize just a few points. First, along with Napoleon, Augustus was a master at using art as political propaganda and as a tool to bolster his power and authority. He treated Roman patricians, especially the senators, with flawless courtesy and respect that almost disguised the reality that he had stripped them of all but symbolic power. He consciously manipulated the public's desire to return to the somewhat mythical days of the virtuous Roman Republic. But he also recognized that he couldn't use age and experience to justify the legitimacy of his rule. Not when he was just 20 years old when he first assumed power as part of a triumvirate of rulers, and just 28 years old when he became Rome's sole ruler. So he turned to another tradition as a source of authority, ancient Greece. What similarities and differences do you see between these two famous statues, and what lies behind these differences? The idealized male bodies are very similar. Look at the legs and feet, for example, and of course those muscled, manly chests. Similarly, the contrapposto stance and the stern but beautiful faces are quite similar. But what important differences do you observe? Augustus is facing forward at his audience, and his hand is extending out to his people as well. This is a much more interactive statue. Augustus is also wearing clothes. Why? Well, first of all, his army uniform is covered with the iconography of power, which sends some very important political messages. But Augustus was also portraying himself as returning Rome to a more sexually virtuous, family-oriented age. The paterfamilias of the whole empire needs to keep his clothes on. As you heard in the Khan Academy podcast, I hope, this statue displays other important symbols. This is missing from the College Board image, which uses the version in the Vatican Museum, but Augustus was probably carrying the baton of the office of consul, shown here on the upper right. This was not just a symbol of power, it was a symbol of republican power. Again, Augustus claimed to be restoring the republic, not creating a new political regime. He is wearing the costume of a general, the imperator, which actually means commander of the Roman army, not emperor. The leather fringe, bottom right, was part of that uniform. In fact, military historians don't think much of Augustus as a general, but he had the good sense to employ a very good general, Agrippa, and to take credit for Agrippa's many victories. Augustus was always all about seizing the propaganda advantage. The relief on the breastplate, or cuirass, advertises the return of the Roman military standards that the Parthians, successors of the Persians in the east, had captured from Augustus's rival Crassus. There are also allusions to various Roman deities, including Mars, god of war, as well as personifications of regions of the empire, Hispania, Germania, and Parthia, that the Romans had conquered or reconquered. The Cupid symbolized the Julian family's alleged descent from Venus. Cupid was another of Venus's sons. The emperor's bare feet, which seems a little odd with the general's uniform, don't you think, offered another subtle hint of his godlike state. Gods were depicted barefoot. There were many, many copies of the statue, a little like presidents' portraits hanging in federal offices all over the country. The image in the College Board set was discovered in the 1800s, and it still bore some traces of paint. A workshop in the Vatican Museum studied these paint fragments and produced this model of the painted statue. This famous work did not make the College Board cut, although it's an old AP favorite. And you did just see it on the video, but I think that looking only at the Augustus of Prima Porta gives you a lopsided view of how Augustus used art as a tool of political propaganda. Almost all Roman monuments celebrate military victories in one of Rome's many imperial wars. This monument is, quite deliberately, an exception. By the time Augustus took power as princeps, that means first citizen, and as imperator, commander-in-chief, and a little later as Pontifex Maximus, high priest, Rome had been embroiled in civil wars for a century. Citizens were tired of war, and they were eager for stable, predictable rule. This monument celebrated peace, the Pax Augustae, later called the Pax Romana. Here we get a closer look for the procession frieze from the altar and a comparison with the Panathenaic procession frieze, which is one of our required works. Note that the frieze on the Pacis shows the royal family interacting. We even see children tugging on cloaks. Art historians debate why kids show up so prominently in this frieze, and almost no others. But one theory is that Augustus was pushing fertility to populate his empire. And it's just as well. The empire has a lot of conquering to accomplish still.